You can call Abby by many names, but Abby the IA is the name that pretty much everybody knows. Abby is now staff information architect at Etsy, which is, so you're kept. It's kind of a kept woman in more ways than one, but that's another conversation for another time. We're really, really lucky to have Abby here. Insider information, there's lots of cities fighting to have her there for next year already. We got super lucky when at IA Summit last year, I kind of cornered you at a bar. at the bar while you were waiting for people to go out to dinner with, and I was waiting for other people to go out to dinner with, and we struck up a deal, and we're so very appreciative of you being here. Abby, as you all know, is sort of a real inspiration to a lot of us in the field. She's written so many good things, put up so much good stuff, and in fact, her new book, How to Make Sense of Any Mess, is available here. She'll be giving away we'll be giving away a couple of copies signed. She'll be selling copies back in the sponsor area and signing those for anyone who wants, so I would encourage you to get it. And despite what our good friend Mr. Saul Worman said, design isn't necessarily a bad thing, and Abby can attest that now that she's doing all this publishing, she's able to actually go back to some of your design roots and do your own illustrations and cool, fun vector stuff there. So this is all very exciting. It's a great read. I encourage everybody to check it out. So we are going to get started right now, and I just want to say that I'm totally going off script, and I do apologize. But Abby is all about collaborative IA. So this is our opportunity to work with her and learn from her and to be part of the process of sharing with one another. So I thank you all for being a part of it. And with that, I will turn it over to Abby.
Am I on? It's like magic. Hi, guys. How's everybody doing? It is freaking beautiful outside, so thank you for being inside with me. That's really exciting. I'm really happy to be here. So first, I want to echo all the welcomes from the local committee about World IA Day and kind of what we're about. As one of the founders of this event, I am so proud to finally be celebrating here in DC. I've watched this community grow over the course of the last 4 years, and it's just really exciting to finally be here. So I also want to give a shout out to Design for Context for allowing me to be here today. It's really awesome. When we started this event, we hoped that it would ignite a worldwide conversation about information architecture. With 58 locations in 28 countries this year, I could not be more proud of the results. Watching communities like the one here in DC come together around information architecture each year makes me proud to be part of this community. Since we're live streaming this, I also want to take a quick moment to thank all of the local organizers around the world for bringing this event into your community. You're bringing information architecture to people who need it at an affordable cost in an accessible location. And for that, I hope you are all very proud of yourselves. This year, our theme is information strategy and structure. And I personally love this theme because it means that we're moving forward, having completed our initial mission to spread the knowledge of information architecture to as many people and contexts as possible. This year's theme is all about getting down to brass tacks, taking that IA knowledge and actually infusing it into the organizations that we work with and for. As a community leader, this is super exciting, but as a teacher and a public speaker on this subject, this theme is also anxiety-inducing, because unlike the education about what IA is, this is the hard part. This is the part that gets murky really quickly. So today, I'm here to talk to you about failure. Specifically, what does it look like to fail at integrating information architecture into an organization? I wanted to tackle this subject because knowing is not the same as doing. We now have a worldwide community that knows about information architecture. It is time to make sure that they are set up to succeed at practicing IA in their unique context. When I proposed this talk, I was working as an independent consultant, providing IA advice to organizations. And the idea behind this talk was to provide advice to other organizations, like the ones that I had been consulting for. But as I wrote the talk, I was also pondering and later confirming a pretty major career change. So as of January, I accepted a full-time position bringing information architecture thinking to Etsy. All of a sudden, I was my user. All of the uncertainty that I had heard about from those I worked for was my uncertainty. When I was considering taking this job, the major reason that pushed me over the edge to accepting was the uncertainty that came along with it. I was certain that I could give organizations useful advice to get to the next level of IA thinking, but I never had to stick around and deal with the day-to-day of it. So what started as advice I wanted to share with others turned into a letter to my future self. And I've gotten to this place that I think a lot of us get to. We commit time towards convincing our organization to understand the impact of information architecture. We fight for teams that we work with to think about IA in their process. And then we reach this moment, this cliff after which everything becomes a whole lot less clear. I call it the now what. So this is the moment that you think to yourself, I taught everyone around me what IA is in theory, and now I actually have to show them what it means in practice. Now, if you're one of these brave souls that has started to scratch past the surface of theory into the realm of practice, then the following will sound very familiar to you. In theory, a controlled vocabulary increases clarity and efficiency within an organization. But in practice, our organization has a language that's been created organically over time and is full of messes of both the human and systems kind. In theory, a taxonomy is best considered from the mental model of the user and the intention that we've set as an organization. But in practice, we have many taxonomies that are already in place. And while they aren't aligned to what we now know about our users, they are what our users are used to. In theory, a good information architecture has a place for everything and rules for why we put those things where they are. But in practice, things change, organizations merge, new markets emerge. Shit happens. So with all these roadblocks on our journey, we can take missteps. And I've seen many companies get to the critical crossroads of theory and practice only to start going backwards. They recognize the theoretical power of information architecture, but relegate it to the realm of in a perfect world. This isn't just dangerous for the field of information architecture. This is something that impacts all industries, jobs, and sectors. As a member of this community, I think it's important to say this out loud. It is no longer enough for people to know what information architecture is. It is time for our community to dedicate itself to seeing through on our promises of making the world a clearer place to live and work. Now, all I can do from this podium is try to use my words to incite action. The rest is up to each of you. Whether you're an information architect by title or not, I hope that this talk speaks to the struggles that you will face as you take your organization from theoretical knowledge of information architecture to practicing IA in an ongoing and sustainable way. So, common missteps. I've spent some time collecting and analyzing the missteps that organizations take when moving from theory to practice of information architecture. And I've identified 5 kind of anti-patterns thus far. Number 1, be afraid to talk about language. Let's face it, talking about language is scary. Our language most accurately reflects the way that we view the world. So having to explain ourselves or being challenged by conflicting viewpoints is one of the hardest parts of being human. Because of the anxiety that's built in, I see teams and organizations shy away from talking about language. They allow everyone to have their own way of saying things, labeling things, and communicating things. I can tell you from experience that this is fine, but only up to a certain point, because disagreements about language tend to be like barnacles on ships. And here are a few things that I know about barnacles. They are unavoidable. They don't start to slow you down until they reach a sort of critical mass. The bigger the ship, the more the barnacles, and the smaller the ship, the fewer barnacles are needed to slow you down. If you're avoiding talking about the disagreements you have around language, the scaffolding on which you stand as you construct your IA will always be wobbly. Without fearlessly tackling this, the people in your organization may discredit or even worse, undo all of the work you do because you have failed to change the way that they see the world. Now, I know that that sounds really big and philosophical, and in today's world, maybe a tad bit political, but I mean it too. I started with this anti-pattern because it is the #1 issue that I see within organizations. I see group dynamics, power dynamics, and struggles of motivation and intention all laid out in one critical failure: not knowing what we mean when we say what we say. Language seems like such a big topic to tackle that it can end up in the perpetual "we'll get to it later" list. But by being afraid of talking about language, organizations are setting themselves up to fail. Number 2. Now, this second misstep is based on the single thing that you can say to me in a meeting that will really tick me off. Oh, we don't want to open that can of worms. Why not? Like, open it. It might need to be opened now, lest it haunt us months or years from now. Shying away from understanding complexity is the surest way to allow it to complexify. Because mess plus time equals messier. I often have to remind my clients and colleagues that the messes we have today will only get messier when given time. When we put off exploring or understanding the complexities we face, we are doing a massive disservice to our future selves. I have seen data architects break down because a can of worms gets opened and forever alters their way of thinking about a problem. I have seen design teams throw out weeks of work because a can of worms was opened too late. And I have seen critical business application projects get scrapped because cans of worms were ignored until revealed in user acceptance testing. So here's what I have learned about cans of worms. It is always impactful to open them, but the later in the process you are, the more impactful it becomes. So if you open them earlier, you throw out a lot less work. When organizations shy away from complexity, they create risk, uncertainty, and a much less happy and stable future. We can create entire visions that are diluted by our lack of knowledge about the truth. As a teacher, opening cans of worms is the hardest lesson to impart on my students, especially when they come in fairly junior in an organization and those above them are the ones that are avoiding the complexity. But no matter what level you are at, it is hard to be the one that calls out a level of complexity that's being ignored. But when no one does, it will come back to haunt the entire team. The third anti-pattern is about time. On my very first day at Etsy, I ran into someone that I had met during my time consulting for them. And they joked with me, "Oh, great, we hired you, so it's all fixed now, right?" While this was a joke, it was also a statement that reminded me about the power of selling people on the theory of IA. Once people understand what IA is and how important it is in terms of their ability to achieve their intention, they want it, and they want it now. As someone in the driver's seat, this can feel pretty daunting. If it took this organization years to get the IA they have in place, how can I personally uproot it and fix it in the length of a project? The truth is, I can't, and neither can you. Even more so, if we could, doing so might actually be irresponsible. You can't often just level an entire organization and start from the ground up. Business can't just cease to function while you think of ways to improve an IA. This is where we differ significantly from those working in physical architecture. When was the last time you heard about a major renovation to physical space where all of the inhabitants and the furnishings would stay in place as the renovations occurred? In my experience, one of the worst things you can do is make major renovations to your IA without consideration for how it will be rolled out and communicated to users. It can be very exciting to launch a major improvement, but when users are used to something, however flawed that thing, it is sometimes better to slow your rollout. When we do major renovations to an information architecture, we are working within what exists while inventing what will exist. It is work that is best done with a sensitivity to the short term while working out the long term. And when organizations expect that the mere existence of an information architect will be like a magic wand, they are setting that person up to fail. Number 4, aim for perfection instead of progress. Sometimes the problem can seem so big that it will never be solved. Sometimes the steps to take to get there are so numerous that the Gantt chart no longer fits on a presentation slide. When this happens, it is hard to even start. When we have spent the time to define what ideal looks like, it is hard to start over in terms of taking the steps to actually get us there. This is why I try to encourage progress over perfection. Because in reality, things will change as you take the steps towards your vision, and then the subsequent steps will have to change as well. For the perfectionist in me, this is painful to live through, but is also a reality of any project that you take on, whether that be IA or anything else. So this kind of turns into the catch-22 of IA. When we start something, we need a vision and a set intention. But as we move towards that vision, our intentions might change, which in turn changes our vision. For a strategic function like IA, this is a hard-fought reality to deal with. If your job is to define the vision, but the thing you create at the end never looks like how you defined it at the onset, what's the point? This reality keeps many organizations from ever creating a vision at all. But maybe worse, it keeps organizations that have created a vision from ever taking steps forward because they can't see a world where perfection will ever be possible. So they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And our last pattern, number 5, fix it, then forget it. The last pattern only reveals itself in the lucky few who have battled all of the others. Let's say that you actually do the work to dramatically improve your information architecture. And for one beautiful day or week or month, or maybe even year, everything is clear and has a place where people can find it and understand it. You have ironed out all the creases. You have a system that makes sense. Congratulations. You can now start your real job, which is keeping it up. Have you ever spent a whole day or a couple hours even making sense of some part of your home, reorganizing things, making it all tidy, only to have that completely undone in a matter of hours or days later? This happens to all of us. This backslide is totally normal. This is because in reality, systems are in constant flux. When we think our IA is a set it once and forget it activity, we will end up with a messy system again. It's as simple and heartbreaking as that. When organizations make IA a project with a due date after which it is considered done, you can set an alarm clock for when they will wake up to a messy system down the road. So, pretty simple. Don't do those 5 things. Everything will be fine. Drops mic, leaves stage. Just kidding. So let's talk about how to move from theory to practice, so I can leave you on perhaps a more positive note than talking about all that failure. Number 1, we need to talk about language as a shared asset. It is very tempting when bringing IA into an organization to try to own language. But when the thing you're trying to own comes out of people's mouths, gets typed into everything from lines of code to marketing copy to interface elements, attempting to have someone or a group of someones owning language will become impossible. So instead, I recommend that you talk about language as the single most important shared asset that your organization has. Everyone uses language in their work, and therefore everyone needs to take part in making major renovations to the language of an organization. Now, I know that in most organizations, getting everyone involved is not ideal, or in some cases, even possible. So what I recommend instead is to build a cross-functional team that cares deeply about language. This team should represent all of the different groups or types of roles within your organization. Do you guys have like safety captains in your workplace? Who has a safety captain? Yeah, a couple of you. They have like those funny hats and vests that they put on in case there's a fire drill. So I kind of think about the language team like that, right? They hold the knowledge that's needed to direct people when they're unsure where to go or what to do when it comes to making a linguistic-based decision. They are the people who point out when something language-wise feels wrong based on the intention that the organization has set to work towards. They communicate changes to language to the people that they work most closely with. They're responsible for representing their domain of expertise when discussions about language take place, and they bring issues up the chain to the larger language team. By creating a collaborative team to talk about language within your organization, you invite an open communication line throughout all levels and roles. And in my experience, this exercise brings a lot of clarity about how language is actually being thought of throughout the organization. And as an IA, organizing groups like this has helped me to gain a better understanding with my colleagues around why things are the way they are and the impact of making sweeping changes, both negative and positive. Number 2, help others embrace complexity. So I suspect in a room full of people who gave up their Saturday to attend an event like World IA Day, there are not too many of you who shy away from complexity. That said, I think it is also our job to spread our ability to embrace complexity to those that we work with. As people who can make unclear things be clear, we have a superpower that can help others feel more secure in their role and more able to meet their goals. But how do we do that? By being the ones who are not afraid to open cans of worms. When things are complex, people avoid them. And when people avoid them, we enter into the list of common excuses. We don't have time for that right now. We don't have the right people in the room. We don't know how the world is going to change, or we don't see an obvious solution, so why even try? The problem with allowing these excuses to get in the way is that complex things always look way scarier in our heads. With each of us in our own heads, there are actually many different versions of that monster that we all face. By being the one who embraces complexity, we can start to wrangle those monsters into a single version that everyone can see and agree on. Through the process of doing so, we start to realize that we now outnumber the monster, and our team starts to feel more sure in our collective ability to take it on. Someone recently said to me, "It is your job to make the overwhelming whelming." And while whelming might not seem like the most glamorous of goals, it is something that people need, something that we feel we can actually take on, even if it's hard and will take time. Number 3, take the time and space needed. When we finally get the right people in the room and we have permission to unravel some tangled web, it is easy to attempt to finish the sense-making part really quickly. When we do this, we are doing ourselves and our organization a disservice. We end up mapping things in an overly simplified way or in a way that is only reflective of the people who are involved. Sometimes the thing we are trying to figure out takes more than a single workshop to work out, and that's okay. That's good, actually. We have to remember that in the practice of IA, our brains are churning through other people's intentions, processes, and historical accounts. This is delicate, thought-based work. At the end of a day full of workshops, it is common that your body is on empty and your brain is on full. This is not a great time to make decisions or recommendations. Instead, this is a really good time to stop and let your brain take a break. I see way too many people trying to cram a whole month's worth of thought work into a 2-day workshop because of the pressures to get things done. But if you end up getting the wrong things done, does it actually matter? Even worse than exhausting yourself, this is the surest way to prove to people that this whole IA thing is a total waste of time. So lobby for the time and space that you actually need to explore the areas you need to explore. One exercise that I recommend highly is to spend 30 minutes individually with every person that you'll be workshopping with. I generally do this the week before the workshopping part starts, and by doing this, you're sort of priming your brain to their personality and their viewpoints, and allowing yourself to warm up to the subjects that are going to be discussed, instead of running full steam ahead in front of a cold audience. Number 4, prepare to govern. The last tip I have for you is the single most important, because no matter how good you are, things will change. People will come and go in your organization, groups will restructure, technologies, trends, and methodologies will emerge while others will fade into oblivion. Just as you think you have your arms wrapped around something, that thing will get bigger. Governance is not the most glamorous part of doing IA work, but it is the most critical. Because without it, you will eventually look up and realize that all of that hard work that you did has been undone. Now, I won't stand up here and pretend that governance is easy. It's not. But it is easier than starting all over down the road. So here's a short list of the things that I think you need to govern. First, you need a governance committee. We talked about that language team. That's a really good start. This is a cross-functional group of people who are willing to discuss language and structure on an ongoing basis to assure adherence and flexibility in equal measure. Next, you need a plan for succession of that group. People will move on and off this team, so you need a plan by which members are replaced, as well as procedures for how they're going to be onboarded. Next, you need a cadence of committee meetings. In order to get people engaged, you need a standard time that they know that they will commit to this activity. If you leave this as an ad hoc meeting, it will not ever get put into practice, and you will not get the level of engagement that you're looking for from this group. Next, you need a source of truth. You need to establish a place where the truth is documented and kept up to date when things change. This is an important piece because no matter how smart the members of your team, keeping all this information in their head alone will lead to inconsistencies and variation over time. And lastly, you need a process for change, a documented set of steps that the group will take when identifying potential change and the implementation of that change. So this is the part where people usually start asking me questions about tools and processes that they can look at, and I have no good advice for you there. Unfortunately, every single organization has to do this completely differently, but I do have some tips on how we might move forward. First thing, committee meetings should not be short in length. The discussions that are had here are best described by a recent client of mine as brain melting. So I suggest that you aim for at least 90 minutes every month. Next, your committee needs to be incentivized to be part of this. That means that it can't just be a labor of love. Their managers need to know that this is part of their job and respect that. Otherwise, it will always fall off the back of their to-do list. I have also learned that this cannot be an over beers after work activity because you will make very funny and illogical decisions as a group. And lastly, the source of truth needs to be a place at your organization already frequent. If you use something that requires yet another login or install or, God forbid, a training session, good luck on ever getting anyone to use it. So with these guidelines and ideas, I hope that you can start to think about what it would mean to govern your organization's information architecture. I'll warn you, it is slow getting going into the groove of doing this work. But I can also tell you that in the organizations I've helped with governance, the team members who are involved often find this work incredibly rewarding. So don't be surprised if you start growing information architect wannabes in the ranks. The most powerful part of governance is getting the whole organization bought into the idea of working together towards a more clear future. When you start hearing things like, we should check the lexicon of approved terms before we name that thing, or maybe we should ask the language team to review this before it goes out, you'll know that you're doing the job right. So to close out my time with you today, I want to review a checklist of do's and don'ts that I've proposed. Don't be afraid to talk about language. Don't ignore cans of worms. Don't expect change overnight. Don't aim for perfection. And don't fix it and forget it. Instead, talk about language as a shared asset. Help others embrace complexity. Take the time and space needed and prepare to govern. For those of you who are new to IA, I hope you're starting to understand the depths that need to be dealt with in order to do this work in reality. And for those of you in a similar place to me, I hope that with this advice, you can move information architecture from theory to practice in your organization. I know I'm going to need to refer to this list as I embark on my journey from external consultant to internal team member. The journey I have ahead of me is exciting and terrifying, but I wouldn't be doing it if it was any other way. So I want to leave you with a final thought that is best summed up by a quote whose authorship has actually been argued about for decades. It goes, "In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is." Thank you. We have time for questions? So I have left time for questions. I hope that you have them. They can be questions about what I just talked about. They can be questions about information architecture. They can be questions about these fabulous sponsored sunglasses that I have from Sapient. Whatever you'd like. We'll just have the mic if anybody has a question.
Hi, good morning,
Hi.
everyone. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. This was great. I'm wondering about how I can apply this at my job where I'm consulting and I'm working on a team for the GSA and I'm consulting with a bunch of other groups as well. So can you talk about, and other consulting companies. So can you talk about, like, I guess I'm just trying to think like how this could apply when there's so many different stakeholders with different, like, just from different sides of things, I guess.
Yeah, well, congratulations, you're a politician. So that's exciting. So your job is really to communicate and educate on the points that were similar to the ones that I gave today. So one of the things that I've tried to do is provide lots of materials for people like you to go and talk to other people who don't know what IA is yet. And then also for people that already do know what it is, starting to experiment on project-based work in the implementation of some of these larger concerns around things like paying attention to language and governance specifically. So I would say my advice is to start small, like find a team that feels really energized about that idea and prove value, and then use them as a case study that you can show to other organizations that are in some way similar to them, and kind of grow from there until you have like a basket of case studies that you can then kind of apply to many places. Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Quick, was wondering if you had a good story about governance.
Oh man, yes. Thank you for asking that. Do I have a good story about governance? I do. Yeah, so recently I helped a startup that was trying to get into a place where their language and their structure could be consistent because they had recently acquired 2 other startups, which if any of you guys have gone through that before, oh my gosh. Like all of a sudden you not only have one language that's all messed up and like barnacly, but you have 3 and you're merging them together. So the first thing that we did was get everyone in a room and try to sort out like where were the hairiest kind of bits of language inconsistencies and work on those individually. The other part of it was the governance part. So when we went to implement all of those changes, we knew that we were going to need a team that was going to be responsible for that in a more ongoing way, especially with me departing as a consultant. So we decided also that because this was a startup, they would be really thrown off by words like governance committee. So we created a group called the Semantic Wizards. It's pretty great. You guys can use that. It's not Semantic Wizards TM yet. And they started to meet on a regular basis. They handpicked the people from the workshops that we did that seemed the most energized about talking about language. And then we tried to, looking at the org chart, we tried to figure out where we needed the most representation and to make sure we had everybody kind of represented. So from there, we developed a cadence of meetings, which the meetings were actually called brain melting sessions. That was, that was a real thing, like on their calendar, like on the invite, a brain melting session in this room at this time. And that was also where I learned that this couldn't be done over beer, was in that company. So yeah, I mean, it's going well. It's all slow and messy, and they seem energized. So.
But you keep them enthused, or they're still enthusiastic?
Yeah. One thing that we did learn though, and I touched on this, is the turnover. Like we just needed to pay attention to that, not just for people leaving organizations, but also people that get really busy on something specific or their job changes and therefore it's not appropriate for them to represent that particular group anymore. So we've more recently had to start to onboard new members of that team. And so it's kind of interesting to watch the second generation of that come through. But yeah, it's been positive from what I understand. Yeah. Hey, Carrie.
Hi, Abby. Thanks. So you talked, at one point you said something about when you get the permission to do this.
Yeah.
Most people here probably don't have that. And I know I haven't in the past. So what are some of the ways you've seen organizations asking for forgiveness rather than permission and still getting this done?
Yeah.
By having a champion at whatever level, and especially at a lower level.
Yeah.
Because I see that a lot as people, oh, I get this and I want to do this, but I can't.
Yeah, sure.
So have you worked with people in your consulting days who have been able to get this done from the bottom or from a lower level or get it an executive buy-in?
Well, I mean, for the most part, when I came in as a consultant, it was because someone from in the ranks got up to the top to ask for help. That doesn't necessarily mean that they had gotten the permission to do it themselves, but they at least had gotten to the point where they had permission to bring in somebody from outside. I would say that I have similar advice to the woman who asked the question, the politician sitting here in the purple. I feel like starting small, and if small means skunk, that's cool, and finding something that you can show real value on. And then this sounds really like just basic, but like you got to have a lot of coffee with people. Like you got to take all the people that aren't like you got to take them aside, you got to buy them a cup of coffee, you got to find out what their perspective is, and you need to like slowly introduce the idea of a world where language could be consistent and try to figure out like what would that mean to them and how can you angle that proposition towards their benefit. And once you're able to do that with enough people in the organization, then all of a sudden it becomes more of a world where you could just grab that permission instead of having to kind of ask for it.
And what do you say about an organization where there's too much jargon accepted? In organizations where they're just using too much jargon, so they think they're being understood, but they're not?
Yeah. I think that every organization that I've worked with has some level of jargon, jargonese, I guess we'll call it. One thing that I like to do is actually call out the jargon as I see it. So one thing that I've had a lot of luck with is assigning a new person in the organization to write a dictionary of jargon. That becomes an exercise where you sort of like make the organization face themselves. It's like holding up a mirror and saying like, really guys, you think that these 3-letter acronyms and code names for projects is going to be clear? From there, you can usually pull an efficiency play on why you should standardize things like that. You can bring up things like the process of onboarding people, which is an incredible expense that companies pay when they bring in new people, especially growing companies. So don't be afraid to kind of attach it to internal metrics like that, not just the external metrics of talking to our users becomes fraught with difficulty because you guys talk jargonese. So you have to write a dictionary and then make them read it.
Hi, I'm wondering now that lots of UX teams and design teams and service design teams are very multidisciplinary and we've got all sorts of people working, we've got this new generation of design leaders who are coming up and they're doing masters and programs at places like MICA and SCAD, and it's really exciting. And I talked to them about IA, and I actually assigned your book, and it's really, really good for them. But they still aren't quite sure how to talk to the rest of the design team because they don't usually come from this place about the value of IA. And you know, it's really a struggle. So when you're thinking about multidisciplinary teams and helping those folks out and future design leaders, what would you say to them about talking to people across those boundaries about the power and importance of IA?
Well, one thing that I've found to be successful about introducing IA is to kind of pull the, we're already doing this and we're not doing it so good. Because IA always exists, right? It's not something that you add, it's only something that you can change. So one way to get them to kind of understand the value of it is to point at the acts of information architecture that are already taking place, and maybe to point at the examples of it where the organic emergence of those things has been detrimental to the team in some way, or to the users, which is often also to the team. So if you can kind of make that the story arc, I see in a lot of cases that what ends up happening is sort of the opposite of that, is people come in and try to talk about information architecture like it's a new technology that we're going to maybe try someday, and it's just not. It's not accurately reflective of what it actually is. So kind of drive home the point that we're all doing this work already. It's just a function of getting better at it and talking about it in a more overt way than, you know, kind of like letting it just happen. Yeah. Good luck.
Do you have any advice for working with clients who are firmly on the unless it's perfect, we can't do it path? And I'm specifically thinking of ways with larger clients that it tends to manifest itself as risk aversion. Like we don't want to try that, we can't fail, we can't make any mistakes. How do you address that?
I would say that if they're averse to the big thing that you're pushing, you need to find the smaller things within that you can actually get done that they feel are less risky. And don't be surprised when down the road all of those things add up to that thing they were so scared of. So you sort of like, it's like sneaking the vegetables into the meal for the kids, you know? They don't want to eat the vegetables. We know that. So give it to them in a way that they don't necessarily see it coming. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming. I'm John, and hi. I was actually interested in, you said, well, you know, some people don't know what IA is, and so I'm going to ask the really dumb question of, you know, so I'll date myself, so I remember SIG IA, when people would talk about little IA and big IA, and so
yes.
Some people know what I'm talking about, right? And so my question to you is, you know, I think of like an information dashboard as being IA, but you were talking a lot about controlled vocabularies and you know, all the things like taxonomies and things that go with that side of the world. And so to you, what should IA and World IAD be?
Sure. So I think that World IA Day has a place for both people who practice big IA and little IA. I will define those things for everybody that hasn't read that fabulous article by Lou Rosenfeld circa 2002, I want to say. Really good read. Google it. It's out there. It's in the IA Institute library, which you have access to for free. And if you get a membership, that would be great. So big IA, sorry, that was my infomercial moment. So big IA is the strategic function of IA. So it's looking at the ecosystem that you're working within and asking big strategic questions about the impact of language and structure on that ecosystem. Little IA is the implementation details of pieces of that strategic structure. So thinking about how are we actually going to implement this taxonomy from a metadata and content management system perspective. That's little IA. In a lot of cases, people that are IAs by function are handling both. In some cases, people who are by title IAs are handling the big IA, and they're working with engineers and product managers and content management system experts to do that little IA part. So I think that the place for World IA Day is really in both camps, and I have a lot of love for both sides of that, because I like a spreadsheet, but I also like a big old PowerPoint slide. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Anybody else? Do you guys just need more coffee? All right, well, I will be around all day. Thank you so much for your attention, and please find me, ask me questions. I love talking about information architecture, so thank you.